Hi, I'm Vicky and today I'd like to teach you how to make a really nice, nutritious rye and wholemeal sourdough loaf without any white flour. When you really start looking into how to make your own sourdough loaf, you'll find that most recipes are made with white flour because it's the easiest way to make a nice big fluffy loaf. But I really like to be conscious of what I eat because I think that your diet and what you consume is the easiest way to take care of yourself. I really like to cook, and making my own bread has always been a given. I really like the whole process. I really find it fulfilling. I love the fact that you always have a spare loaf to give to somebody else, and I find that that's the easiest way to put a smile on other people's faces. Making your own bread though can be time consuming, but I'm barely ever at home, so trying to juggle both things has been a little bit tricky, but I really think that now I've perfected my recipe into the 3 key areas of nutritious, effortless, and not time consuming. So I hope that you can give this a go and see how it goes and really enjoy the whole process. Let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is to turn our sourdough starter into the levain. So the starter is what you keep on going to make all your future sourdough loaves. You first have to weigh the jar that is going to be a designated starter jar. So for example, if my jar is 150 grams, then I always find that as my base. And you are always going to remove starter from here until there's only 25 grams of starter left. So if my jar weighs 150 grams, then I want to, after I remove the weight of the whole thing, to be 175 grams. I have all of this written down so you can look at it better on the blog, which will be attached to the description below. But anyway, so I pulled this out of my fridge last night. So today is Friday morning. Last night, before I went to bed, I pulled the starter jar out of the fridge so the bacteria in the ferment start being alive again. When you put it in the fridge, it goes dormant, or at least it slows down the fermentation process. But as soon as it gets back into about room temperature, it comes back to life. And now we're going to feed it so it can rise up again and become active. Like I said, the starter is the one that we're going to keep going, so I'm going to leave 25 grams of starter in here and feed the 25 grams, 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. If you make more bread, you can scale it up. Like for example, my jar, I do 200 grams of flour and water for 50 grams of starter just because I make more bread, but for any home baker, usually 25 grams to 100 is about enough. The levain is what we're going to be using to actually activate the dough that we're making today. The levain we make in the morning that we are going to be making the bread. So like I said, today is Friday. I removed the starter from my fridge last night to use to make the levain today. For this recipe today, you'll need 130 grams of the starter scrap from our mother starter, to 150 grams of flour and 150 grams of water to make the levain. Takes around 4 hours for the levain to become active for us to start making the dough. So during this 4-hour period where we're waiting for the levain to reach its peak to start the dough, this recipe in particular, because we're using rye flour, you have to do a scald. So why a white flour bread is more fluffy naturally is because it's refined flour. Where with the wholemeal flour or rye flour, all the husks and the shell of the grain, it's still in there, which is much harder to absorb the water, which makes it into a less fluffy bread. So by scalding the rye flour with boiling water, we increase the hydration and therefore end up with a much fluffier bread. So this is what we're going to do now. I've got 400 grams of rye flour here, and I'm going to put, let me check my recipe, 795 grams of boiling water into the flour until it becomes almost gelatinous. And then we're going to let it cool down completely until the next step, which is when the levain is ready, which is why I do it now, so then it has time to cool. So I'm not waiting for anything else. So I'll show you what it looks like once I've poured the water in. Careful, especially if you're using metal bowls, the bowl gets hot. So this is my levain now. You can see it's very bubbly. Okay, so we're ready to make the dough. 4 hours later, our levain is ready. My scald has cooled down and we're ready to go. In my stand-up mixer bowl, I've got the scald. I will add 25 grams of salt and 25 grams of honey. $395 grams of our levain, which as you can see, it's pretty much everything, but you can either store it in a smaller jar, the leftovers, or you can feed it again. It's just enough to start a whole new starter and give it to a friend as a gift, with a little recipe and a link to my video if you'd like. And yeah, I think it's a lovely, humble, keep the tradition going. Like I said, it's one of the best things. It's beautiful, costs you barely anything, 200 grams of flour. So anyway, distraction. Now we're going to add 335 grams of water. Again, doesn't always need to be very precise, but try to be as close as possible. And in here, I've got 800 grams of wholemeal flour. I'm adding it on top. It just helps with the incorporation, so you don't have to scrape from the bottom as much as it's mixing. And now with a dough hook, you'll mix it in the mixer for about 10 minutes. I'll show you how it's going, and just make sure every minute or so you're just scraping from the bottom, making sure everything is incorporating nice and equally. We'll mix at speed 2.
Like I said before, I tend to not always be at home in the whole process of making the bread. So I have not been doing any stretch and folds, and the bread still turns out amazing. But if you do have the time, I recommend every half an hour doing it 3 times. So for an hour and a half, every half an hour doing this, you just pick it up, let it drop on itself, and then fold it over. It's quite easy. Just be gentle and just watch out for any rips on the dough. If it starts ripping, then you've done it too much. You just want to do it enough so that it starts to go smooth. It's never going to be completely smooth. The dough is very sticky. But you're just wanting it to get some of that tension and build some of that structure in the dough. And you're going to do it maximum 3 times throughout a period of 4 hours. You can do it every half an hour. You can do it every hour. You can do it not at all if you're somebody like me. But yeah, if you have the time, do it. Okay, so at the end of the 4-hour bulk rise, now we are going to shape the bread. So this dough will make 3 loaves. So cut your dough into 3 as equal as possible bits. I can never get it quite right, but it's just for my own consumption, so I never weigh it, but you're welcome to if you'd like. And then we are going to do a pre-shape, which is just turn the bits of dough into a roundish shape. So you're just pulling it into itself, turning it over, and with the bench scraper, just tugging at the bottom a little bit to make it kind of round. Doesn't have to be perfect. This is just a pre-shape. Once you've done the pre-shape, you're going to let it sit for 10 minutes and then you are going to do the actual shaping. So for the actual shaping, you will get one of the pieces of dough, dust the bench with some flour, flip the dough over onto the floured bench and pull it into a triangle shape, a rough triangle. Then you will pull the top part of the triangle up and into itself, and then pull it either side, and then just keep going down the dough. Usually you can get 4 to 6 sort of turnovers. Some people call it shoelace, different names. And then you will just use your fingertips to tuck the dough into itself until it becomes a little roll, and then you will flip it again onto its back, and this time using your thumbs and your palms to round it up. So not as tight as the tucking with the fingertips. This time is just to make it into a round shape, or still like an ovular but long shape. And that's it. You've got your loaf. If you're like me and you didn't do the stretch and folds, usually I do this last process with my thumbs and my palms twice. But if you did do the stretch and folds, just do it once. That'll be plenty. Once you've done that, I don't like to use plastic, so I don't put my dough in plastic bags. So I just cover it thoroughly with some flour and put it on a little tray that I have. I don't own bannetons, but if you are going to go out of your way to buy something, definitely buy bannetons. They're so much better. They will not stick. Sometimes this does stick a little bit when you flip it out, but just make sure you flour it well if you choose to do something like this. Then into the fridge it goes. Cover it up with a tea towel. It just helps the dough from not drying out, since I don't put it in a plastic bag. But yeah, overnight, and then tomorrow morning, baking time. So next day, I have preheated the oven to 250 degrees with my Dutch oven inside. So I want the pot to be hot as well. And I'm just flipping the dough onto a silicone mat and slicing it with a really sharp knife from the very top to the very bottom in a little bit of an angle. And I like to give it a couple slashes just to make sure that the cut goes deep enough. You want it about to 10 centimeters deep. And then into the pot it goes. If you don't have a Dutch oven, just make sure you put a little ramekin with some water inside the oven or inside another pot with a lid. If it's not cast iron or anything like this, just make sure there's some steam going to help it get that spring in the first half of the baking. After 25 minutes, you take the lid off and you put it back in the oven at 230 degrees for an extra 20 minutes.
Thank you so much for getting to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you will give it a try. If you haven't given it a try yet, the recipe is down below or on the link to my website, so you have a much easier reference point to go to instead of rewatching the video all the time. But definitely give it a go and let me know how you go. Like you've seen, the recipe yields 3 loaves. So you always have a loaf to spare, so you can give it to a friend or chuck it in the freezer so you have to make bread less often. But yeah, the more you do it, the more you'll get better at it. It's all little tips and tricks and just repetition, and the more you do it, the better your loaves will get. I am still learning. I am definitely going to keep tweaking this recipe. I want to potentially get to a 100% rye loaf, so keep an eye out for that. And if there's ever anything else you'd like me to cover on this channel, put it in the comments below or send me an email, and I will catch you next time.